The king is back. 357 Magnum versus 9mm+P. So I haven't tested 357 Magnum through my 4-inch barrel revolver in quite some time, and I'm getting sick of the 9mm fanboy talk about how 9mm, if it's a +P, is just as good as 357 Magnum. So I brought out some gold dot ammo to put that statement to the test and put it to the rest, because 9mm is not even close to 357 Magnum. So what I have today is our gold dot 9mm+P 124 grain that's rated at 1220 feet per second, and then I have our 357 Magnum 125 grain, just 1 grain heavier, that is rated at 1450 feet per second. I'm going to use my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686 to test the 357 Magnum, and my Smith & Wesson M&P 9 2.0 to test the 9mm+P. So this is a 4-inch barrel revolver and a 5-inch barrel semi-auto. That's actually the same barrel length, because when you compare a 4-inch revolver to a 5-inch semi-auto, the amount of travel from that bullet is very similar. So you always use a 4-inch revolver to compare to a 5-inch auto, or a 4-inch auto to a 3-inch revolver. So we'll see how 9mm compares, 9mm+P compares to 357 Magnum. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain clear ballistics just to see what the best potential of those are, because, you know, we always get expansion in clear ballistics without any fabric or anything like that. We'll see what the best potential is. Then we'll move on to doing more of a real world simulation. I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. In that format, this is about a half representation of the density of flesh. So if we get like 15 inches in here, it would be like 7.5 inches on a real living target. So we'll do our plain clear ballistic shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we'll run our 9mm+P 124 grain jacket hollow point, gold dot hollow point. This is rated at 1220 feet per second. I believe that's through a 4-inch barrel. So let's see how close we get to 1220 feet per second out of my 5-inch M&P here. $12.33, $12.18, $12.33, $12.16, $12.18. So we're really close to that rated velocity, but through a barrel that's a little bit longer than it's rated. Now 357 Magnum, this is rated at 1450 feet per second through, I believe, a 4-inch barrel. Let's see how close we get to 1450 feet per second with the 357 Magnum. 1489, 1385, 1355, 1357, 1348, 1363. All right, so quite a bit below that rated velocity, except on that first shot. So that's kind of disappointing, but even for a weakly loaded 357 Magnum, it's definitely faster than that 9mm+P. Let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, we'll do our first shot in the plain clear ballistics. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point, prevent hollow point expansion. No rib simulation that can slow down its potential for penetration. So let's see what we get with our 9mm+P. All right. I'll set that with our 357 Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, so obviously both of those expanded, but our 357 Magnum went a little bit deeper. So looking at our first 3-inch piece here, 9mm on the bottom, 357 on top. Pretty close, but there's a little bit more energy dump with that 357 Magnum, and then entering the block there's a little bit more of that with our 357 Magnum as well. And then also our 357 Magnum continued to go a little bit deeper, and that's, you know, simply from having more energy to do all that. So our 9mm+P actually looks pretty good. We have really big expansion, but our penetration only went to 11 3/4 inches. That's pretty good penetration though, because, you know, that's not bad, to be honest, because it's so close to that 12-inch minimum people like to see, and that 12-inch is only, you know, usable when you're talking about a side shot. So for the most part that would work. Now our 357 Magnum, we have a little bit more ideal penetration of about 16 3/4. So a lot of energy dump and a lot of good penetration with that 357 Magnum. So yeah, I'd say a 357 Magnum looks pretty good here. Let's put on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, and do our real world simulation now. All right, our real world simulation: 4 layers of sweatshirt material, followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Ideally, these bullets staying within that back rib simulation and not going through is the most ideal, but if they go through it, they can go up to about 3 inches past it, and I would still find that to be acceptable. So 9mm+P real world simulation. Let's see how this does. All right. Now let's hit that with our 357 Magnum and see how that compares. Let's go take a look. All right, so through our real world simulation, there's honestly not as much of a difference as what there was through the plain gel shot. So that 9mm+P is definitely a good round of ammo. 9mm+P on the bottom, 357 on top. You know, honestly, there's pretty much no difference there to that. And our penetration is very similar. Now the first 3-inch piece here, pretty similar. There's a little bit more, I mean just barely more damage with our 357 Magnum. Also going in the main block, it's hard to tell, but there is just a little bit more right there with our 357 Magnum. But this is a pretty nice looking 9mm+P, performs very well. What we got with that is 17 3/4 inches, and it's got really good expansion. Now with our 357 Magnum, what we got there is about 17 inches and really good expansion. So very consistent from these barrel lengths. And one thing I like is, you know, both these are different bullets actually. The 357 Magnum, it says gold dot, but it's their deep curl hollow point gold dot, which is a little bit different bullet. They usually use it for the 357 SIG and 357 Magnum, as where the 9mm is got a bigger open hollow cavity, and they use that in the 9mm and stuff like that. So they definitely know what they're doing when they're putting these loads together. It's like they do test them. So I'm liking what I'm seeing here. So there is a little bit of an advantage in power and stopping power and all of that with the 357 Magnum, but with this ammo, I would say not as big of a difference as what there is between a lot of different ammos. So interesting. Let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them, and then I'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel. Here's our 357 Magnum. Here's our 9mm, and I got to admit, that 9mm is pretty impressive when we're talking our plain gel shot. That expanded out really big. So if you're not going to hit bones or fabric or anything like that, that 9mm is going to be pretty effective. That's not to say that the 357 Magnum would be ineffective. I think in this plain shot here, both are pretty comparable, because you got to factor in the extra size with the 9mm, but you also got to factor in the extra energy with the 357 Magnum. So looking at this, pretty similar performance. And again, when we go through our real world simulation here, pretty similar performance on these bullets, our 9mm and our 357 Magnum. The only real difference here is our 357 Magnum is more rounded on top right here because it peeled back a little bit more from that extra velocity. Diameter wise, a 9mm here versus a 357 here, not much difference, but then you also got to factor in that little extra energy with the 357. That's going to make it a little bit more effective here. So looking at this, my overview here is, in the real world, our 357 Magnum would still be a little more effective, but this particular gold dot is a lot better than most 9mm rounds. So I would feel confident and comfortable carrying either one of these. So very nice. That's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, so I decided to split the difference with my shooting at the steel target from what I normally do, you know, close up and far away, and do 25 yards and just kind of see how these things shoot. So the elephant in the room has always been capacity, 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 capacity. And there's no arguing. This is a 17+1 semi-auto pistol. So when I carry this thing or have it loaded for defense, it's got 18 rounds in it versus this has 6. So people will always say, well, 9mm is better. Here's the thing. Not only do I study ballistics in terms of like what they do in gel blocks and what they do to actual living targets, but that comes along with looking at the data, like how many shots are fired on average in a self-defense situation. And that is 1 to 5. So the fact that, you know, this has like 18 really is not applicable. In addition to that, if you look at all that data, there's a lot of different data on this from different sources. Stuff like 357 Magnum has a lot lower average shots fired to stop or to incapacitate than a 9mm. So not only are you going to resolve most situations with 5 shots of 9mm or 5 shots of 357 Magnum, but you're going to do it probably with less rounds of 357 Magnum, making, you know, it very easy to stop a threat 2-3 shots of 357 Magnum. So that's just something to keep in mind. So anyways, I'm going to shoot and I'm going to try to do a reload with the 357 Magnum, see how much that slows me down. So I'm just going to aim center mass and see how these things do. So 9mm+P, 25 yards. So I did pull some down. And I'm not a competition shooter. I'm just a ballistic tester. So this is not my forte, but just interesting. So I got a reload right here in my pocket. So I'll do 6 and then a reload and do 6 more. So 357 Magnum. So I missed that first shot, and there's definitely a difference in skill level here. And what I think that first shot I missed is because I'm not used to this trigger again, because I haven't been shooting revolvers. If you look at my videos, I'm the revolver guy, but I haven't been shooting them much. So it does take a little bit of getting used to, and this is the first time out with one in a while. So I'm not used to that double action trigger pull, which I need to get out more and test more with this. But looking at this, practically speaking, there's not a huge difference there. It's definitely easier to hit with the 9mm. But again, this is going back onto, like, people will say it, you know, 9mm is better because you can land, you know, 18 shots, 18 more. And while that might be true, if we're talking like a competition, if you want to win some sort of competition of how many shots you can land on target, yeah. But I'm looking at this from self-defense and looking at this from the 1 to 5 shots is your average fired in self-defense. And within that parameter there, the 357 Magnum is still the king. It's still the king of stopping power. It still has less shots fired to incapacitate. It's not that hard to shoot. It's not that hard to reload, honestly, as we saw. So I think it, honestly, for the average person, the 357 Magnum, at least out of a heavy enough gun to handle it, is a little better than the 9mm, because, you know, you got to know a little bit with the 9mm how to work it. You know, the 357 has a little more recoil, obviously. So you got to take that into consideration. Maybe load 38s in it if you have somebody that's going to be using that's a little bit weaker. But if you're just an average size person, the average strength, I think 357 Magnum is going to serve you a little bit better if you actually had to stop a threat. Just my opinion based on all the years of research I've done. So interesting. That's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. Thanks for watching.